believe in the power of the beauty of your dreams. You've got to have a goal.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner, Sharon Sutton.
Welcome to the latest new episode of Island Influencers, where my guest this week is Dr. Rachel Glover, an experienced molecular and computational biologist. Rachel's expertise is in molecular ecology, biosurveillance, bioinformatics, and genomics. She originally trained in molecular microbiology and spent 14 years in the UK Scientific Civil Service, developing DNA tests and methods for species detection. Rachel is the founder and chief scientific officer of Taxa Genomics, an environmental and veterinary genomics company. But you've probably heard of Rachel because she's been instrumental in the setting up and running of the Isle of Man COVID-19 test facility, playing a vital part in the monitoring and combating of the virus. So welcome to Dr. Rachel Glover, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the show, Dr. Rachel Glover. It's great to have you here. If you don't mind me asking, can we go back in time? Can you tell me all about yourself, where you were born, where you brought up, to present day, really?
I was born and raised in Douglas, so I'm Manx, and I went to St Ninians and then left to go to uni in '99, and I went off to Aberdeen to do microbiology.
Yes.
And you know, I didn't really come back, I'll be honest, after that. Like a lot of graduates, I came back for a few months after my undergrad, and then I had to decide whether I was going to stay on the island. And at that point I was working for Hamblin, the recruitment consultants, as like a general administrator. Gosh. And working in the evenings, I was working in a pub called the Clary, which a few people over here might remember.
I do.
It's where I learned how not to take any crap off anybody, standing behind the bar in there.
There's three of them, wasn't it? There was three of them, the Douglas, the Clary, and what was the other one?
I think the Albert behind it.
The Albert, yeah.
Yeah, still there. But, but, you know, so I was doing that and I thought, well, I really want this career in science, and I'm just not going to get that on the Isle of Man. So I thought, right, I'm going to have to move to the UK again and see if I can find a job over there. And I had some friends who were doing postgrad stuff in York, and some were from the Isle of Man and some were from like my previous flatmates in Aberdeen. And I thought, well, York is as good place as any you know, it's fairly central. If I need to get an interview in Cardiff or Scotland, it's, you know, equal distance. Yeah. And so I moved to York and managed to get a job as a kind of low-grade job, really, in the scientific civil service at the time, at a place called the Central Science Laboratory, which tells you absolutely nothing about what they did. Yeah. But it was one of the executive agencies of DEFRA, one of the labs of DEFRA, which is the environment side of things. And so I got this job as an assistant plant virologist. And it was a job that had been advertised in the local paper in York. It hadn't been advertised as a graduate job or anything like that. Gosh. But what I didn't know when I applied for it was that that's exactly how they advertised for graduates in York, you know, that were coming out of the universities. Was, you know, you would go in at this entry level that was, you know, the job only said, oh, you just need some science A levels. And I thought, well, I've got a degree in microbiology. That might give me an advantage over, over anybody else. I'll apply for this. So I applied for that job and got it. And what I didn't know at the time at all was the team that I was going to go in and work for. I had no concept, to be honest. I was just like, I don't care what job it is. As long as I get a job in science, I don't mind. Yeah, gosh. And the team that I ended up working in was known throughout government as Novel Methods. So it was within DEFRA, the team that developed DNA tests, that came up with new methods, looked at the new technology that was coming about and started trying to implement that for government and the different applications that government might have. So predominantly we were involved with food testing and plant health, because prior to COVID, actually the biggest experience in things like lockdowns and biosecurity is actually in the plant health side of things, not importing plant diseases that could decimate the country's crops.
Yes.
So I ended up working in that team for about 14 years. And throughout that time, I got my master's, I got my PhD, I got promoted a couple of times, and I ended up working predominantly in detection of new viruses and sequencing viral genomes and using the computing side of biology to help with the detection of new species. So it was all hugely interesting, but there was always this thought of, I really want to move back to the Isle of Man. I want to go home.
I read in you something about you that said that you weren't over enamored with your A levels and for some reason, and it was only when you went to university and you discovered microbiology that you sort of found your passion. So I was just wondering what it was particularly that drove you to that kind of passion from being, a bit about biology A level, presumably.
I did actually really enjoy biology A level. I wasn't very good at chemistry, which it turned out it wasn't that I wasn't good at it. I just wasn't very good at learning it in the way that it's taught for school, for exams.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm quite a practical person. And so lab work, and coding and stuff like that really works with my brain, things that I can see working and figure out problems.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's, science as a whole is about solving problems. All you're doing every day is just solving problems. And so when I got to uni and the teaching was more, here's a lecture, but you need to go off and read all about this subject and delve into it, and, we'll examine you on it at the end of the year. That really suited the way that my brain works and the way that you could just go down that rabbit hole. And if you wanted to learn just enough to pass the exam about that thing, fine. If you then wanted to go down that rabbit hole even further and really go into it, of course, the university is going to be very happy to do that and let you do that.
Yeah.
So whereas school was a little bit more, you needed to learn this to pass an exam. And I'll be honest, I think it was a bit boring at times, and you're just like, I don't know. But uni just twigged for me.
Yeah. And genomics, I had to Google that. The branch of, for our listeners, I shall read out what it says on Google. The branch of molecular biology concerned with the structure, function, evolution, and mapping of genomes. Well, actually, it doesn't really tell me very much, other than I still don't know what it means. But
no, so it's genomics is a relatively new field. So for science, what that means is that it's been about for about 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
So all of the DNA that we have inside all of our cells and inside of all of the other organisms on the planet is in a code, effectively. So that's made up of 4 letters, A, C, T, and G. And the combinations of those letters read like a book, effectively. So every chromosome is basically billions and billions of these letters in, like, if you were to read it like an encyclopedia, it would be a huge book of paragraphs and chapters.
Yeah.
And a genome is all of that DNA that makes up that organism. Mm-hmm. So you have multiple copies of that book in every cell of your body. Every cell of your body has 1 copy of that book. And if you could imagine then how many copies of that book must make up us, that's a lot of DNA.
Yes, a lot.
So genomics is the analysis of that data, effectively. So in the last 10 to 15 years, that's really shifted into it being a little bit more of a computational science rather than sitting in a lab pipetting liquids from one place to another science.
Yeah, okay.
So that's been an evolution of the field, and a lot of that has come about from new technologies that have come around, and there was a big shift in about 2008 that really changed that into a more computational side of things. So that's where I ended up within the civil service, was that I spent the first 5 years of my career or so developing DNA tests in the lab and deploying those to various places. But then as it shifted, we were doing more and more genomics work and using genomics to detect pathogens. And that meant that I needed to skill up, basically, take advantage of an opportunity. I'd always been a bit geeky, as you can imagine. And one of the things that I had always wanted to learn at school but never got the opportunity to in the 90s was to learn how to program.
Right, okay.
So this opportunity within my job to say, look, if I can teach myself these skills either outside of work or alongside my job, then I can actually start doing this kind of work in this team. And one, it'll save them employing somebody else to come in and do it. But two, there's an opportunity there because that's where the future is.
Totally.
So I think I just kind of jumped onto that opportunity and took advantage of it and ran with it, really, not completely knowing where it was going.
Yeah.
Genomics has come a long way in those kind of 12 years. So
you're not kidding. So, I mean, is that what gave you the opportunity to move back to the island then?
A little bit. So probably from about 2014, 2015, I'd been coming back to see friends and family and for holidays and things.
Yeah.
And I'd been trying to engineer those visits to match up with the dates of the biomed cluster meetings. So there was a biomed cluster at that point.
Yeah, sure.
And
they meet out at St John's Mill, don't they? Is that
right? Sometimes, various kind of places, sometimes Eagle Labs. And so I was a bit like, okay, if I go to a couple of those meetings, maybe I'll find somebody who'll be prepared to give me a job.
Yeah.
Seems
logical.
Yeah. And then as it went on, I thought, actually, I'm coming from a place where the team I currently work in is incredibly entrepreneurial. It was the team that produced DEFRA's first spin-out company, and it was a very applied team. It wasn't blue sky thinking. It was, how do we make this product and how do we make it work for government? And so that made me think more that maybe where I needed to be was to actually set up my own business, doing the thing that I was good at, and see whether that worked. So for about 2 or 3 years, I was talking to various people around the biomed cluster, and I'm pretty sure they all thought, oh, she's back again. She keeps saying she's going to come back and set up her own company, but she hasn't done it yet. So, I think they were probably sick of seeing me at that point. And then in late 2016, my mum was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer.
Oh dear, I'm so sorry.
That was a very interesting December and Christmas because we were just kind of constantly travelling between the Isle of Man and Clatterbridge.
Yeah, sure.
So for me at that point, I spent 6 months of the first half of 2017 working 2 weeks of the month in York at my job, and then 2 weeks of the month working on the Isle of Man remotely, helping to look after mum and, keeping dad sorted and, everything like that, all of the family stuff, coordinating hospital appointments, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And after 6 months, I thought, I can't keep doing this. This is ridiculous. I've been thinking about coming back to the island for so long. I've now been here for 2 weeks every month for the last few months. I should just quit my job and just do it because, my mum, we knew she had a limited time frame. She'd been given a prognosis of about 12 months. Yeah. So it was like, right, if ever there was a time where I was going to just do it, that was the time. Yeah, so in August 2017, I resigned my job on the Monday, which came as absolutely no shock to my boss because they'd been seeing me, coming back and forth for 6 months.
Yeah.
And I think 2 days later, I managed to sell my little flat in York as well. So I was like, right, I've got a few weeks to work at my notice. So, let's coordinate and move back. Let's get everything sorted.
Yeah.
And the sale of that little flat kind of gave me a little bit of a financial buffer to spend time with my mum without having to worry about work when I came back. And just get my head straight as to what exactly I was going to do business-wise, job-wise, to earn money when I kind of really got started. So it was a big shift, huge shift, really.
Oh, bless you. That is amazing, gosh.
And then, I think the weird thing about that period was that when I'd been doing my undergrad degree in microbiology, I had thought at that point, maybe I want to be a biomedical scientist and work in a hospital and do microbiology, like medical microbiology. And it was during my undergrad, I'd been working as a medical laboratory assistant in the Aberdeen Royal Infirmary to earn money and pay my rent and keep me in beer, that kind of thing.
Of course.
And that was when I realised that I really didn't want to be a biomedical scientist. It was all a bit routine and it was very repetitive. And I just thought, no, that's not for me. I want to do research. If I'm going to get a job in science, that's where I want to be. And so coming back to the island in 2017, I was encouraged to apply to the bank at the hospital to work as a medical laboratory assistant again.
Okay, yeah.
Just to, give me a break from looking after my mum, and give me a little bit of pocket money, I suppose, to make sure that I was okay financially.
Yeah, goodness.
And I ended up working not that many shifts in the hospital labs, just, sorting blood and delivering it to the right lab inside the pathology laboratory. But nobody there really knew what it was that I'd done in my career up till that point, other than the two people who interviewed me, where I'd said, I don't want to be a biomedical scientist, I don't want a training contract, I don't want a full-time job here, but I'll sort blood for money, was pretty much how I got the job, I think. So that's how they kind of had an awareness of who I was when COVID hit this year, and what I'd done in my previous career. So
sure.
Because I'd been in the scientific civil service, although I'd been working in this novel methods team and looking at genomics and everything like that, we actually had lots of other responsibilities within government. So I'd been doing quite a lot of on-call work for the Home Office to characterise kind of suspicious packages and make sure that they didn't have nasty pathogens in them that that the UK government were interested in. So I had quite a lot of what we call containment experience. Like yeah, so having that containment experience and that kind of high-risk microbiology background has actually come in very useful through COVID
too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's face it.
Yeah, so being able to go into a containment lab, which is a negative pressure laboratory where you have to be very careful about what you do and to not infect yourself with that pathogen, because I was already trained in that work, and had trained, most of my training in that had been at Porton Down. So I was like, I'm okay with walking into containment labs and dealing with pathogens. And
I think most of us ever seen that stuff in movie shows, in television shows, and that's as close as we want to get to it. But and I'll be honest, it's never like the TV shows. Okay, well, I don't. Yes, that's fine. That's.
It's always just as boring as any other lab work, but you just have to be a lot more careful.
Yeah, absolutely.
But having had that experience, that was all on my CV when I'd approached the Path Lab to do a few bank shifts, and I didn't end up doing very much of them because my business took off.
Yeah.
So
how did that happen? Tell me about how that happened. How the business took off.
Oh God, so many hours.
It's called Taxa Genomics, right? Which is it's an amazing name, and because what we do is more based around economics, and so Taxa Genomics is it so any related? No, it really isn't.
I mean, we're based up in Village Walk, and we get a lot of stuff delivered because it's science, and we have to order a lot of things. And most of the delivery drivers from the courier companies on the Isle of Man over the last 3 years have in some way got us mixed up with the name of the company. So we've been called Tax Economics, Tax Genomics.
Yes.
One delivery driver even came in one day and looked suspiciously at the lab door and kind of went, "Is that where you keep the dogs?" And I looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" And he went, "The taxidermy. Is that where you do the dead dogs?" And it was
I must admit, that was one thing that crossed through my mind when I was Googling it. I wonder if it has anything to do with stuffing animals. No, I'm sure it isn't. No. So
I should probably explain the name. So, of course, genomics I've already explained, but taxa is the Latin word for many species. Yeah. So a taxon is one single species, and taxa is many species. So it's a term that's used by biologists quite a lot. But for the kind of work that I thought that the company was going to do when I set it up, it fit really, really well, because what I'd spent a lot of time in the last couple of years at FERA, at CSL, the government lab, doing was detecting lots of different species from like one sample. So a big project that I was involved in was with the Environment Agency, trying to figure out how we could transition a lot of their, microscope type-based detection methods to a DNA test instead. So what they were doing was they were counting different species of diatoms from rivers. So diatoms are like little silica algae. The tiny.
So you'd be looking at it through a microscope, would you? identify that sort of way, right?
The Environment Agency were hiring lots and lots of private companies to count the diatoms of different species in these samples, and the percentage of each species in the sample would give them a good indicator of whether the water quality was good or okay or poor.
Yeah.
And that all fed into a big European framework, water framework directive, and there's a lot of incentive to reduce the cost of that testing. And it was a big push even now, but certainly in maybe 4 or 5 years ago within the UK government, to reduce the costs of everything the government did.
Yeah.
So moving that kind of testing from lots of people looking down microscopes to a DNA-based method that's very high throughput obviously had advantages in reducing the cost of that to the Environment Agency.
Yeah.
So those kind of things, we're looking at using DNA-based testing to do a DNA test that would basically say, of all of the diatoms in this sample, 25% of them were this, 18% of them were that, 25% of this.
Yeah.
And those kind of methods have been evolving over the last 4 or 5 years, so it's relatively new.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, there's probably a market in doing that kind of testing privately, and I've got the experience now and the knowledge to be able to set that up.
Well, I had a look on your website, and so you do genetic sort of detection of diseases in dogs, or inherited diseases in dogs, which is.
So I cast the net quite wide in setting the company up and saying, well, we'll do environmental testing and veterinary testing. I had a little bit of previous experience in animal genetics, in having sequenced the Manx cat genome, but then most of my skill set really is in developing those detection methods, and whether that's detecting a species or detecting a single letter change in DNA, it's all the same thing. It's just termed molecular diagnostics.
Yeah, sure.
So applying that molecular diagnostics to veterinary testing was a market that I thought, okay, there's companies in the UK here who are making money doing that. If nothing else, let's give it a go and see whether there's market or space in the market for another player.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a punt, to be honest, about setting up a brand under Taxa Genomics called the Pet Genetics Lab, and seeing whether we could develop a customer base of, it's testament to our customers, I suppose, that they were prepared to take on testing from a new lab that they had never heard of before, and trust the results to go off to the kennel club and their breeding programs to be dependent on that.
Well, your CV sort of speaks for itself, to be honest.
Yeah. But weirdly, what's happened over the last 3 years is that that's become a huge part of what the company does.
Yeah.
So it's grown. And I remember the accountant saying to me 3 years ago, well, in your first year, you'll make a loss. In your second year, you'll break even. And in the third year, everything will be fine. And that's exactly the path that the company has taken.
Great. So congratulations. That's a testament to your hard work and ability. It's not easy to do that.
I mean, I think people think I'm over-egging it when I say how many hours I've put into getting it all up and running. It's insane.
Have any of those people asking you that set up your own companies?
No.
There you go.
Those people understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do.
I come from a background where, my dad worked up at Doughty's in Onken.
Yep.
Vast majority of his working life.
Yeah.
My mum was an accounts assistant. My dad's side of the family, my dad grew up in Williston.
Yeah.
My granny basically didn't have very much money to put them through to school and things. So it was a bit of an eye-opener for me when I did go to university in Scotland, because I'd been brought up eating at home and at my granny's this thing called stovies, which is like my granny was Scottish, so it's like a one pot dinner with onions and potatoes, and it's a little bit of lard, and it's all kind of softened down and stewed.
Yeah.
And when I went to Scotland for uni, people were like, "Oh, you should try stovies." I'm like, "Oh, I know what stovies are. They're great. Potatoes, onions, lard. It's amazing." Yeah. And they're like, "But there's meat in there." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And it's just because the stovies in our family, because my granny had been so kind of, I guess, kind of, I don't want to say poor, but like difficult to get by. But, like my dad grew up in that family, and that's,
it's a common story for the island. It's a common story from the Isle of Man. The islands, the history is not rich.
My dad and my mum, despite in the mid-90s, the interest rates being that high. I mean, I was a teenager at that point, and probably the biggest thing that my parents did for me as I was growing up was instilling that work ethic that says, do you know what, if you want to earn money, you're going to have to go out and do it yourself, because we haven't got it to give you. So if you want to go and buy magazines at the corner shop, you're going to have to go out and get a job to go and earn the money to get it, because
and then brave it up at the Clary behind the bar. I mean, it's amazing. So I mean that's what I know. One of the things I ask our guests is, what's your earliest memory of money growing up? It sounds to me like it was quite a challenging time.
I wouldn't say it was challenging. I don't remember it as challenging, but I think if you were to talk to my dad, I think he would say that the 90s were quite stressful because, of course, of the interest rates. And I think at one point he was made redundant. But as a teenager, I was a bit oblivious to the realities of all that, other than, I had to go out and get a job. But so did my little brother. It wasn't anything odd in our family.
No.
It wasn't. I find it odder now seeing kids who have been completely protected from the workforce until they're in their mid to late 20s, and then all of a sudden they have to try and get a job, and they've got no work history because mum and dad have supported them to the extreme. But that now seems to be a lot more normal.
I know. No, my young fella's 13, and he's just got a job on Saturdays at Bobby Sadler's.
Yeah,
what a great opportunity.
Was delivering the courier.
Yeah,
I delivered the courier around Westmoreland Road and Kensington Road in Douglas, and it was 2p a paper was what we got paid, and this would have been 1993 or so.
Yeah.
But that £3 or £4 a week was, it was amazing at the time. It was like, oh my God, money! This is brilliant.
Yeah. So you're right.
And then I progressed on to shelf stacking at the Co-op, and then shelf stacking and customer services at Marks and Spencer, and then off to uni and continued all those part-time jobs through.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I do think that helped me enormously in getting my first jobs in my career, and even when I came back to the Isle of Man, because I had skills. I was
to talk to
shown effectively over 10 years already that I was employable.
Yeah.
And that I could hold down a job.
Well done.
And it was, I think that was probably one of the biggest things my parents gave me, was that work ethic that says, you've got to go out and earn what you want. So nothing's ever handed to you on a plate.
No. Do you mind me asking what happened to your mum when
she passed away in the November of 2017, so about 3 months after I came back?
Gosh, I bet she was very thrilled, very grateful that you came back and gave her all that time there, Rachel.
I guess so. It's
certainly your dad.
Yeah, it's difficult to remember even that time, because it was a brain tumour that she had. So we lost her much sooner than we actually physically lost her.
Oh, I see.
So if you can imagine rapid dementia over the space of a year, it's
Oh, that's very sad.
It gave me the jump to come back. And one of the great things that I like about the Isle of Man is that I have got all my family here, and I'm about to move house, and weirdly I'm going to be round the corner from my brother and sister-in-law and my nephew, and I'm going to be round the corner in the other sense from friends from school. So it's
that's nice. Of all the things you've done throughout your life so far, what's given you the most fulfillment? You go from personally or business or both, I don't mind, but
it's a bit weird, because I find it very difficult to blow my own trumpet. I've been desperately trying harder at it the last 6 months, but
you're a Commonwealth Games shooter, aren't you, miss? That's
the thing. It's just like
that's
the
pretty
moment,
scary.
Yeah.
Which games did you go to?
I went to Glasgow 2014.
Yeah.
And the Gold Coast 2018.
Very nice.
And there's no shooting in the Birmingham Games, but because India threatened to boycott the entire Commonwealth Games if they didn't include shooting in some capacity, there's actually going to be a Commonwealth Shooting Championships in India in January 22. Okay. So 7 months before the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
That at the moment is on my horizon. along with the European and the World Championships next year. But with COVID, it's very difficult to say even whether those things are going to go ahead.
Yeah.
Or even at the moment, trying to find the time in the day to train. So I'm just starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, that maybe I can start training again. That would be quite nice.
So rifle shooting, are you at the St John's one out there, Sinclair Range, is it? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. So it's just in St John's, just past the Hope.
Yes, I know where it is. I've shot there once, I think. Yeah. A long time.
It's I'll be honest, it's one of the best ranges in Great Britain, and it's a real hidden gem on the Isle of Man, because where I was in York, I trained a 45-minute drive away from home, and if I wanted to get electronic targets like they have at the international matches, I had to go to either Aberdeen or Cardiff.
Yeah.
Whereas on the Isle of Man, they're now like 10 minutes from the house.
I think the Isle of Man Sport gave them a fair bit of assistance with that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they did. I'm surprised that with the games being at Birmingham, though, the Isle of Man didn't sort of step up and say, hey, we could do this, because we've got all the facilities. How else are we ever going to hold the big games, that won't happen otherwise? Yeah.
I think because, I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but I think when there was a competition between whether the UK was going to have it at Birmingham or Liverpool for the proposal, because it was supposed to be in Durban in South Africa originally.
Yeah.
I think that when it was going to be in Liverpool, there was an approach, or at least an idea, that the Isle of Man could help host the shooting. But I think every country that has any shooting athletes objected to Birmingham not including shooting as a sport at the games anyway, because most of the small countries like us are dependent on shooting for medals.
Yeah.
So,
no, absolutely, we sure are. Well, and business-wise, I guess it must have given you a fair amount of satisfaction to be on the COVID team to get our testing up and running.
Yeah, I think it's a really weird one, that one, because I spent so many years in the scientific civil service.
Yeah.
And I am incredibly proud of setting up the lab, but I kind of feel like I was just doing what I'd been trained to do.
But if you hadn't been here, no one would have done it.
It's really odd, because I the way it came about was that obviously COVID was moving forward, and you could see the cases increasing around the world through January and February. Through the middle of March, the start of March, I was starting to think, I should really get in touch with them and remind them that I'm still here, just in case they need a hand with anything, or if I can help with a slightly more rapid test, because I knew that they were sending off to Public Health England in Manchester.
Yeah, it was quite a long turnaround, wasn't it? It was
it was 3 days.
Oh, right.
And that was at that point when there was very few cases in the UK, never mind the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man hadn't had a case at that point.
Yeah.
But a 3-day turnaround to me was ridiculous, when I had a lab in Onken with the ability to do about 800 tests a day. And
800?
Yeah. But that was, well, you could probably double that even with the technology I had. And I thought I could at least give them some kind of indication of whether a result is going to come back positive. There must be a way that I can help, or if lend them equipment or something. So I sent an email up to Steve Doyle, who's the head of the Path Lab, and it was on Friday the 13th of all things. And I sent him an email going, look, he was one of the guys that interviewed me when I first came back to the Isle of Man. And I said, look, do you remember me? Do you remember my CV? I now have my own company in Onken. I've got a small lab there that mostly does inherited disease detection, but I've got equipment that might enable you to do either a quick turnaround test, even if it's not an officially sanctioned PHE level test, because I didn't have a real-time PCR machine, which is the machine we would have needed. What do you think? If there's any way that my company can help you and my lab can help your lab, let's have a conversation, and maybe there's something that we can do. And on the Tuesday, they sent down Chris Helm, who's one of the senior microbiologists in the lab up there, and he came out, I think, really to scope me out and see whether, if I was talking about doing this, whether I actually did have the ability to help. And I'll be honest, when he left that day, I turned around to my customer services lady at the time and said, I don't think they're going to go for that. He didn't seem overly impressed. I now know that it's just because Chris is a bit grumpy. But I thought, oh no, I can see where this could be, and I could see what we could do, but maybe they don't see it. Maybe I've not communicated that well enough.
You've got this imposter syndrome, haven't you?
Oh, definitely, for sure. Absolutely. And so the next day I got a phone call from Chris.
Yeah.
And he just said, I found a real-time PCR machine. And I went, what do you mean? He says, I thought I'd seen one in the government analyst's lab a couple of years ago, and I've just been down there.
I remember reading that. Yeah.
And he says, I've got it in the boot of my car. And I went, what type of real-time PCR machine is it? Because there's lots of different models and there's lots of different types, and no idea what it was. And he went, I don't know. Do you think you could come up to the hospital in about 10 minutes and tell us how to use it? So, 20 minutes later, I was stood in the microbiology department of the hospital, looking at machine and mentally ticking off all the things that we would need to do to get it commissioned. It was exactly the same model that the company who makes them had told me the week before they were in short supply because Public Health England were buying them all up.
Yeah.
And it was just a real stroke of luck that it happened to be sitting there.
Didn't you find another one as well? Was there two?
It did, yeah. I managed to find one secondhand in the Netherlands.
Right.
That I managed to order before it all kicked off, really.
Okay.
So I've got that machine in my lab at Taxa as a backup to the hospital, but also as a doubling of capacity should we need it.
Yeah. Because so by my calculation then, if you said you could do 1,600, they could do 1,600, so we could do in the Isle of Man 3,200 tests a day if we needed.
That was slightly different from what I was originally proposing, but that's about where I would love to see us at. And I think that isn't outside the realms of possibility should everything go a bit pear-shaped in the next few months. So that's been a big part of setting up the lab, actually the logistics and thinking what we need, when we can get it. Reagents and test materials have been there's been shortages all over the world at all times.
Yeah. And I remember seeing something about a helicopter. Do you know that story?
Yeah, that was a really strange one. So I'd been asked to give Ralph Peake a call.
Oh, one of the MHKs,
it might be useful. Kind of he is one of the Treasury MHKs, and I think they have really good links with some high net worth individuals on the Isle of Man who were desperate to help and didn't know how to help. And so I called Ralph Peake on that Saturday morning and gave him a potted overview of what we were trying to do in setting up on island testing and where we were up to. And he said, look, what's your biggest problem today, right now, that we might be able to help with? And I said, well, we've got a calibration plate for the machine that came out of the government analyst's lab that's currently defrosting at East Midlands Airport because the company sent it DHL, and DHL won't put dry ice on the plane. So we need to speak to them again on Monday and get it sent by another courier so that it goes on the boat instead of onto the mail plane.
Yeah.
And he said, well, tell you what, give me the tracking number and we'll go and see what we can do. And I didn't think anything much more of it, to be honest, until lunchtime when I was in the containment lab and Steve Doyle walked into the containment lab and went, why do you need a helicopter pilot to have an exemption to bring stuff back to the island? Because, of course, the island was on lockdown at that point.
Yeah,
nobody could leave. There was no flights leaving. There was nobody coming in or out. And I went, I don't know. Why have they asked you for that? And he said, apparently you've got a calibration plate that's stuck in East Midlands Airport. And he says they're sending a helicopter for it. And I went, oh my God, okay. Well, it is important. It is something that we need. And if we get this through the machine this weekend, we can commission the machine and start using it and start validating the testing and get everything online. So if we can get that and it doesn't take another 3 or 4 days for us to have it shipped from the company in the Netherlands again, great. It saves us 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
So he went off and wrote that into the application form, I guess, at that point to the Cabinet Office to ask for an exemption for this pilot to be able to come back into the island. And in the background of all of that, they were arranging, obviously, for the helicopter to go and pick it up and speaking to DHL to stop this package going back to the Netherlands. And literally Steve Doyle walked into the lab at 5 p.m. that evening with the little polystyrene box with the calibration plate in it. And it was just, very
that's
strange,
amazing.
strange day in my scientific career, that's for sure.
Yeah, only in the Isle of Man, hey? Yeah. Gosh, well.
Yeah, very odd. But,
so how soon did we have the testing up and running after that? Was it a couple of days?
It was a couple of weeks. There was only there was some procurement delays of getting other bits and pieces that we needed. So there's just been worldwide shortages of everything, and it seemed to be the last 3 or 4 months that everything is settled with the suppliers producing more and more of the things that everybody needs. But as the cases are increasing again, we're starting to see the same shortages. So a big part of my role is trying to make sure that we're constantly supplied with test reagents, that we constantly have enough in, so that there's never going to be a period where the Isle of Man can go, sorry, there's no testing today because we've run out of plastic lids for the machine.
And I guess that's so more important as we go into the flu season, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, do you mind giving me your view on where you see COVID lasting to, and how long is a piece of string?
I suppose it's very difficult to say how long it's going to last, and for me that's been quite a challenge over the last 6 months, because I came into the hospital lab system thinking I'll help them get it set up, I'll be here for a couple of weeks, and that hasn't really turned out to be a short-term thing. I'm now kind of 6 months in, and weirdly, in parallel to that, I'm having to run my own business too. So
never worked harder in your life, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think people seem to think, oh, there's no cases on the Isle of Man, so Rachel must have time in her hands again. And no, I'm still doing 100-hour weeks. That's become normal now, which is really, really scary, and I really need to change that. But the company, all of the dog testing, the inherited disease testing for breeders and people wanting to register their dogs on the Kennel Club, bizarrely, the market for that tripled during lockdown. So the first week of lockdown, our sales kind of plateaued, and I thought, oh, that's good, because I've just volunteered to help the hospital for a couple of weeks. So if that settles down for a little while, that's not a bad thing. And then really, I'll be honest, I think everybody just wants a puppy during lockdown. They're all working from home and just thought it's a great time to get a dog. And then puts pressure on the breeders to sell more dogs that they've got to produce, and then those dogs have to be tested. So on the back of COVID, it's been very strange in that actually for the business, it's been very beneficial, because there's been that drive in the market for people wanting to bring a pet into their home at that point. So that's increased our pet testing business. So it's been difficult juggling those two priorities, and that's probably my biggest struggle personally at the moment, is how much time goes to COVID in a week, how much time goes to the business in a week, and I have to constantly be managing those two things.
And what about work-life balance, Rachel? Do you get much of that?
At the moment, no.
Well, if you did, what would you do? Because I noticed you're a trustee on the Manx Wildlife Trust in your spare time.
Yeah, no, I always feel guilty, and I do say that to the other trustees of the Wildlife Trust as well, that, I feel guilty that having been a trustee for just over a year now, I haven't been able to give them as much time as I'd hoped when I
think I'd forgive you.
I think they understand that COVID's been a little bit busy. But it's, at the moment, I seem to be finding a happy medium in the fact that I always seem to be out of the office by 6 or 7 o'clock, regardless of where I am. And then I'm working from home in the evening. So I can sit and chuck Netflix on while I'm working. And it just gives me that little break where I'm not constantly full on working all the time.
Oh, okay.
So I'm working my way through lots of different Netflix series at the moment.
Favorite program at the moment?
Oh, I've been working my way through The Fall.
Oh, I've seen that advertised. That's what's her name from Scully, isn't it? From X-Files. Yeah.
So don't spoil the end for me.
No, I haven't seen it. No, I must watch it. I've been looking at Cobra Kai.
I keep seeing that one. I'm going to have to work my way through a lot of different.
Have you seen the Karate Kid? Did you watch that? Oh, well, you have to start there. It won't make any sense. Fair enough.
It's just been really weird. when everybody else was in lockdown, I was working at the hospital, and so I missed a lot of the series that everybody was watching during lockdown. So I kind of feel like I might catch up.
The most bizarre thing that made me feel good about lockdown and good that it was COVID was watching Fox's War of the Worlds, which is where you're in, we're invaded by Mars, aliens from Mars who just kill everybody. So it was actually relatively, it could be a lot worse, but sorry.
Well, work-life balance is fairly terrible at the moment, but it's one of those things that I'm actively trying to change. And so I'm starting to get back into thinking when I can go training for shooting, because that's something that's always relaxed me. You have to relax properly to shoot well. So
shooting guns, what does that say?
Well, it's weird. Everybody thinks it's like shotgun or something like that, but really I like it because it's precision.
Yeah.
So
it's like biathlon, the rifle part of biathlon, when you have to lower your heart rate and you control your breathing, and
and so it's all about it's like a target rifle shooting. That the kind that I do is more like a combination between yoga and physics. So it suits my scientific side because your brain is constantly going. You're looking at the light, you're looking at the wind speed, you're looking at the flags that are going. You're trying to figure out what kind of you need to offset in order to have the wind blow the round into the middle of the black circle that you're trying to hit the middle of. So your brain is constantly going, but if you don't relax properly, if you don't get all of that tension out, if you don't kind of really, like you say, drop your heart rate, drop your blood pressure, you won't hit the middle anyway. So for me,
is it long bore then that you do?
It is, yeah. Okay. It's small bore, but it's long bore rifle. So it's very, very precise, and what we're trying to do is hit the middle of a black circle, but the very middle of that we need to hit is about 5 millimeters in size, and it's 50 meters away. So, and you don't have any magnified sights, and you have to take consideration of the wind and the weather and the light dropping and how that affects your view of the target. So for me, there's that like enforced relaxation in going shooting. If I want to shoot well, which I always do, and I'm a hideous perfectionist, so I channel a lot of the perfection into the shooting, so that people say that perfectionism is an advantage, and you hear people in interviews saying, "Oh, what's your biggest your strength?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm a perfectionist." And like I say, anybody who's a perfectionist knows that it's not a strength; it's a huge weakness, because a perfectionist means you never finish anything. You never, nothing is ever completed or right, or there's always something else you can do to it. So for me, shooting, I can put all of that perfectionism into that, and it stops it affecting the rest of my life, where I can go, that's fine, I'm done with that, that's finished, because I can channel all of those kind of
now I get that
perfectionism type things into shooting. So I always want to do well, so then that makes me relax when I shoot, and then I have that hour or so where I'm completely relaxed and dropping my heart rate and chilled out. So
great. Well, let's hope you get some time for that soon. Before the flu season comes along. I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, why is the UK getting its testing so wrong? Is it because the Isle of Man's just smaller scale, or is it something else?
Oh, that's a tricky one, because I almost have to be careful what I say, because technically I'm a DHSC employee. So, but I do think that the way that we're running the testing on the Isle of Man is bespoke to us. It's bespoke to the Isle of Man. It's bespoke to the way that the Isle of Man is with our borders. When you look at the UK, they've been very fixated on the number of tests, but they haven't really been prioritising where those tests go. So that's starting to come out in the last few days, that they're now saying, okay, we have this test capacity, we're going to concentrate on the NHS and vulnerable people, as opposed to everybody who wants a test gets a test, even if they have no symptoms and no reason to get a test. So for us on the Isle of Man, we've been really doing that from the start, because we knew we had a limited capacity for testing and that there weren't any other options. Sending off to the UK on a 3-day turnaround was already slow, and we're now seeing that the UK is doing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-day turnarounds for the NHS testing. So we know we've got a limited capacity here. We're never going to be in a position where we can test the whole of the Isle of Man every day. which I'm sure there's people here who would want that to happen, but you have to think of the actual physical limitations of doing that, and the operational side of things and the logistical side of things. The testing that we've set up is very, very targeted, I suppose.
And I suppose that links very much importantly to the test and trace, which seems to have been fantastic here. But again,
it's one of those great things that the Isle of Man, we're so small, that's very similar to business. So if you think of a huge business that has large departments, different arms in different countries, they'd be very slow to react, because lots of people who don't know each other have to try and work together to find solutions that work across multiple places with multiple different logistical challenges. On the Isle of Man, I would say that everybody who's involved in testing knows each other and can get them on the end of the phone, and a solution can be worked out really, really quickly. So, for example, to heap a bit of praise on the microbiology team at the hospital, last Saturday, when we detected the first case coming back in, within 2 minutes of me having seen the data and gone, oh crap, there's a positive there, I'm on the phone to Rebecca Shields, who's the chief microbiologist in the Path Lab, going, look, I think we've got one. She's then onto the phone to get it repeated on the rapid machine, twice, in fact, 2 different rapid machines to confirm the result, because of course it was a big result coming in. And, us pulling the panic button and saying, hey, we've got a positive case on the Isle of Man, after, I think it was 100 and something days, we want to be absolutely sure that we're definitely not going to be calling a false positive result. So you check it, a false positive result is never reproducible. So we tested that particular sample multiple times with multiple different methods. And then that was sent on to the medics, who then, the medical microbiologist and the head of the path lab, and up through the contact tracing chain. And it's this very small but rapidly moving system. So I believe it was in the hands of the ministers within an hour or two of us actually calling that result. So the fact that is a small team that seems to work very, very well, I think is a real advantage to the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You've got people who are just prepared to drop everything and come in. So I think there was myself, Rebecca, and Polly, who is the microbiologist, who was on call that night, all in the lab at 9:00 on Saturday night, confirming the result, making sure that it was exactly right, and it wasn't anything wrong with it, so that nobody could question whether.
There's a tale of devotion, isn't it, to the job and to the people of the Isle of Man, that everybody is prepared to drop everything on a Saturday night and go do that. So thanks for sharing that.
It's one of those things, and I think that just like a small company that can move quickly and be pretty agile, the Isle of Man is like that. The people who are in those positions to get stuff done know who those people are and can move quickly.
Good.
Whereas compared to the UK, it's
that's very clear. Okay.
Big corporate.
Yeah. So tell me, what do you think are the best things about living in the Isle of Man?
Oh, I think for me, the community. I think the fact that everybody does pull together. I think that you can see that it's certainly with COVID, that it's not just the government and the lab and the people doing the swabbing and everything like that. It's the actual community and the people who are doing their self-isolation without complaining too much. And it's a big ask to say stay in your house for 2 weeks and don't go out, and get somebody else to do your shopping for you and things like that. And I think the community on the Isle of Man has really enabled that to happen. So it's probably another thing that's helped the Isle of Man during COVID more than perhaps the UK. But I think I really like that about the Isle of Man. It's small, it's safe. When I was living in York, I lived in a block of flats where there was a heroin dealer in the ground floor, and you would see the same kind of alcoholics roaming the streets at certain times of the day. And so compared to that, the Isle of Man is like an amazing little safe haven where the only thing you have to worry about in the Isle of Man is who's going to be curtain twitching, not who's going to be breaking into your car. So
fair enough. Yes, don't get up.
I really like that about the Isle of Man, and I think that's a real selling point.
Yeah.
I also like the fact that my extended family are here and my roots are here, and I returned here because of that in a big way.
Yeah,
so.
I can see that. for the main challenges that the Isle of Man faces? I think you've described quite a few of them.
I think brain drain is a big issue, and I was part of that brain drain for many years, and I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine from school who now lives in Chester, probably 10 or 15 years ago, about this. Sat in a coffee shop in Chester going, God, the Isle of Man really needs to sort out its brain drain. And we're just like, but we are that problem. We don't go back. So I think there's really got to be some incentives to making the island attractive to the graduates.
It is. Yeah, there are some opportunities though, aren't there? Especially at the moment, people like yourself, for example. Yeah.
I think that if the government's able to incentivise that in some way, I know that for certain sectors there are incentives to bringing in those qualified staff from the UK that perhaps aren't present on island, national insurance, holidays, that kind of thing. Yes. But actually, if those were available to bring graduates, now whether those are Manx graduates or UK graduates who like the look of the Isle of Man for family or personal reasons, then I think we should be active in bringing those graduates to the island, because so many of the young people who have ambition and who might have skills that really want to come back to the Isle of Man and make a success may not think that they can do that here. And I think we've almost got to show them that it is possible.
No, Rachel, it's not new. It's been going on for well over 50 years. It's, it really isn't new. So,
But, me at 23, the first thing I wanted to do at 23 was leave the Isle of Man and not come back for a few years. So I think perhaps it's just a rite of passage maybe, and we've got to hope that more people do come back later in their careers with those skills that they've maybe developed in the UK.
Yeah, totally. And in fact, that brings you back to the Isle of Man with more skills than you left, and it's it is a great opportunity if they can find a way to promote that more. Yeah, good idea. So what have you got planned next?
It's really difficult for me to plan at the moment. I've got big plans for the business, but it's the rate limiting step in that is me.
Time, by the sounds of it. There's only 24 hours in one day.
Yeah, apparently I have to sleep as well. So
overrated by the sounds of it.
There's lots of things that before COVID I would have been doing with the company this year. I really want to expand into kind of testing with the vets and actually expanding the number of services that we do other than genetic testing to kind of some basic hematology and microbiology type work. But that takes time to set up and time to strategize. And so I've had to put a lot of those business goals almost on hold and hope that everything just treads water whilst COVID is going on, and then pick them up as soon as there's more time available either for me or that the opportunities become so apparent that really it's more of a priority for me to spend that time with the business than with the lab. So it's constant juggling, but I'm still always hopeful that there'll be those opportunities will still be there in 6 months or 12 months time. So
it sounds exciting. It sounds a great opportunity for bringing in more microbiologists from the UK.
Well, I'm going to be hiring a scientist at some point in the next few months.
Well, there you go.
I need somebody to come in and do lab work.
So are there any books you've read recently that you would recommend to our listeners as maybe a source of inspiration or self-development, philosophy, or just a good read?
It's probably the way of things. The last 3 years, I've pretty much only been reading business books. And that's a shame, because I always used to read fiction, and I'm a big reader, and I can read a book in a day kind of thing if I really get into it. So
there's some good business books that are sort of that go across the whole sort of spectrum of business, don't they? Not just your niche. I quite
enjoyed. I think it's called "Start with Why" by Simon Sinek.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, I've read that. Yeah, it's a brilliant book.
It's one of those things that you've really got to have in business, that you've got to have a reason why you're doing that, and I think that helps to drive everything. So for me, I wanted a business that was going to be sustainable so that I could continue working on the Isle of Man for as long as possible. because when I moved back, I had no idea whether I was going to end up having to move back to the UK for a job again. So in sitting and thinking, where do I want this business to be? What do I want it to be? Who am I helping? How is that going to work? I think it helps to solidify exactly what direction you're going in.
Okay, what's your favourite quote, Rachel?
There was one by Eleanor Roosevelt, and I had it on a card through my time at university, kind of stuck on the wall. And it was, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was along the lines of believe in the power of the beauty of your dreams. You've got to have a goal in life of some description. And that quote just let me think, okay, I want to be a scientist. I want to do this. How am I going to get there? And if I don't have that dream, if I'm just going, I just want a 9 to 5 and I don't really mind where that 9 to 5 is or what it's doing, then that wouldn't have driven me to say, leave the Isle of Man again and go and become a scientist in the UK and bring those skills back. I would have just ended up becoming a recruitment consultant at Hamblin, working in the Clary a couple of hours a week or something, So I think that quote is quite a good one, certainly for early in my career, where you almost have to go through that uphill struggle of getting things set up and taking risks and almost jumping in full steam ahead without really knowing where something's going to go.
Yeah.
And then if there's opportunities along the way, just grabbing them. And if there's an open door somewhere, running through it.
That's great. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that. So where can more people go to learn more about you, the work that you're doing and your organisation? So I've got a list of your website and social media links. Is those the ones we should do, the taxonomics? So the Taxa website is probably a little bit up to date, but it needs a bit of a revamp. Okay.
But for me personally, Twitter is where most people would find me at the moment, whether they like my opinions or not. I think I get away with it on Twitter a little bit, but I'm not somebody that really sits on the fence when I've made a decision about something or if I assessed the data and the evidence on something. So
that's really good.
Twitter is a good place to find me at the moment. Whether I'll stay on Twitter, who knows? I go through ups and downs. I think my biggest loss, I suppose, through COVID is that my Twitter now is not what it had been for the previous 9.5 years, which was me being able to interact with other scientists around the world about various kind of technical things and papers that had been published and general back and forth conversations with those people. But now it's become a little bit more like public service announcements and trying to explain COVID and the science and around that and trying to dispel some of the myths around it and the conspiracy theories. So, my Twitter has evolved over the last 9 months in a way that I wouldn't have expected. But otherwise, I kind of feel a responsibility to, if the data says that something is not going to be working or it's not the way that we work here on the Isle of Man or there's a conspiracy theory that needs to be stamped out, I kind of feel a responsibility that as a scientist I should say something about that.
It's a job you're doing for the community. It's brilliant. Keep it going.
It's just, and I get the impression from what people are saying that they're not used to somebody just going, no, that's rubbish, don't listen to that.
It's refreshing. What can I say? Keep it going. Don't stop. Oh, brilliant. Well, but thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a really great opportunity for me to find out all about you, and it's again, thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.